Emilio Verano's hands were shaking, and that alone should have terrified him more than any bullet ever had. He was standing in his private satellite office in a downtown skyscraper, a fortress of black oak and Italian leather, where even his most trusted Lieutenant Franco had to knock 3 times before entering, and tonight the room felt less like a sanctuary and more like a coffin. In front of him, the military-grade security monitor cast a cold blue glow across his face, waiting for one final password, one final keystroke that would either confirm his worst nightmare or set it free. He loosened the knot of his silk tie, the same tie he'd worn to a sit-down with 3 crime families that morning without flinching, but now it felt like a noose tightening around his throat, because this wasn't about territory or money or blood debts. This was about his children. Emilio Verano, 37 years old, the man who ran the south side of Chicago's underworld with an iron fist, the man whose name made grown men stammer and look away, was afraid. Genuinely, bone-deep afraid, and it was the kind of fear that only a father who'd already buried his wife could understand. Just 24 hours ago, he'd ordered a second surveillance system installed throughout the mansion. Cameras the size of a pinhead hidden inside smoke detectors, behind abstract paintings, even inside the glass eyes of his daughter's teddy bear, all because his fiancée, Regina Ashford, a stunning blonde from one of Chicago's most powerful old money families, had come to him crying the night before, rolling up her silk sleeve to reveal an ugly bruise on her pale arm, whispering that the nanny, that quiet young woman named Julieta Marin, who'd been caring for the twins for 3 months, had attacked her in the kitchen and shoved her against the marble counter. And then Regina had leaned into his chest and whispered the words that detonated every rational thought in his skull. If she'd do this to me, Emilio, imagine what she's doing to Noah and Gianna when you're not home. What if she's someone Kowalski planted inside our walls? That was all it took. The mention of his enemies infiltrating his home, the image of his 18-month-old twins helpless in the hands of a potential spy, it shattered him. He didn't stop to question why the bruise looked oddly symmetrical. Didn't stop to remember that Julieta had never once raised her voice in 3 months. Didn't stop to notice that Regina's tears dried suspiciously fast. He just saw red. He'd wanted to handle it that same night, the way his world handled problems, permanently. But Regina had talked him out of it with chilling logic. You need proof first. You need to see who she's working for. Don't start a war over a mistake. So he'd spent the night installing cameras and the morning humiliating Julieta, ordering her to scrub every inch of the mansion's marble floors on her hands and knees, while wearing rubber gloves so she wouldn't leave fingerprints on his furniture, telling her with a voice cold enough to freeze blood that if he found a single stain when he returned, she shouldn't expect to see tomorrow, and in his world that wasn't a metaphor. Now here he sat, finger hovering over the laptop's enter key, ready to watch the monster reveal itself remotely, ready to give Franco the kill order. He pressed it. The screen split into 4 feeds, and Emilio braced himself for violence, for neglect, for proof that his children were in danger. But what appeared on camera 3, the wide-angle shot of the grand living room bathed in late-afternoon Chicago sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, wasn't a scene of horror. It hit him so hard he had to grab the edge of his mahogany desk to keep from falling to his knees. There, in the center of the cream-colored Persian rug, was Julieta. She was on her knees in her simple gray uniform and white apron, bright yellow rubber gloves still on her hands because she'd been scrubbing his floors exactly as he'd commanded. But she'd stopped. In her right arm she cradled Noah, the boy's tiny head resting against her shoulder, his fingers gripping the edge of her apron, his face perfectly peaceful, completely safe. In her left arm she held Gianna, the little girl's face buried into Julieta's chest, her small hand clutching the collar of the uniform, searching for warmth she couldn't find anywhere else in that cold mansion. And Julieta was humming, her eyes half closed, her lips moving in a soft melody, not caring that her knees ached on the hard stone, not caring that she'd been treated like a slave that very morning, not caring about anything except the 2 motherless babies who'd chosen her arms as their refuge. Emilio Verano, the most dangerous man on the south side of Chicago, the man who hadn't shed a single tear at his own wife's funeral, felt a hot, heavy drop roll down his cheek and land on the polished wood of his desk. He'd installed those cameras to catch a monster, and instead he'd found the only proof that mattered, proof of a love so pure and so fierce that it made every dollar in his empire feel like pocket change, a love that he, their own father, had been too blind and too broken to give them. And then, just as the guilt began to crush him, He saw something on the monitor that made his blood run cold for an entirely different reason. The living room door swung open, and Regina walked in, but the woman who entered wasn't the trembling victim who'd cried in his arms last night. She moved like a predator, and the truth, the real truth, was about to explode across that screen in a way that would change Emilio Verano's life forever. If this story's already got your heart pounding, do me a favor and smash that like button so more people can hear it. Share it with someone who needs a good story tonight, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let's go back to that living room, because what Regina did when she thought no one was watching is something Emilio will never, ever forget. Regina didn't walk into the living room. She slid in like a snake through grass. And Emilio, eyes glued to the monitor from his private downtown office miles away, immediately sensed the difference between the woman on the camera and the woman who'd cried in his arms last night. The cream Valentino dress clung to her like a suit of fashionable armor. The red-soled Louboutins clicked against the marble with a cold, decisive rhythm. The rhythm of someone who believed she owned everything under this roof, including the people inside it. No tears, no sobs, no trembling shoulders, just a glance that swept the room as if she were taking inventory. And a chill ran down Emilio's spine when he realized those eyes had never known fear, not for a single day since she'd first stepped into the Verano estate. On the other side of the lens, Giulietta reacted in an instant. She didn't need to think, didn't need anyone to command her. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, the way a mother dog instinctively stands between danger and her litter the moment she smells a threat. She set Noah down on the rug beside Gianna so gently the little boy didn't even open his eyes, then stood, smoothed the white apron over her gray uniform, and lowered her head, but her torso shifted sideways by one step, only one, just enough to place her thin body as a shield between Regina and the two children lying on the rug. Emilio noticed it, and his heart clenched, because she'd done it without thinking. Not because she was paid, not because she feared being fired, but because the instinct to protect was carved into every muscle, the way breathing was. "Good afternoon, Miss Ashford," Giulietta said, her voice soft, with a slight tremble at the end. Regina didn't bother to answer. She stopped in the center of the living room, ran one perfect manicured finger along the armchair, checking for dust, then lifted that finger to eye level and examined it as if she were studying a specimen under a microscope. Then she lowered her gaze to Giulietta and smiled in a way Emilio had never seen on her face, the smile of a predator that knew it stood at the top of the food chain and was looking down at prey. "Do you know where you are?" Regina said, her tone light as if she were asking about the weather, but every word carried a blade. "This is the Verano estate, not the South Side slums where you grew up. So when I say clean, it means I don't want to see a single speck of dust. Or is that tiny head of yours too small to hold a simple instruction?" "Yes, ma'am," Giulietta answered, her eyes still fixed on the floor. Emilio's fist tightened on his desk until his knuckles went white, because Regina's voice came through the speakers crystal clear, and he realized that wasn't the voice of a woman traumatized after an attack. It was the voice of someone used to giving orders to people beneath her. Regina walked to the corner where the bucket of soapy water sat against the wall, looked down at the marble floor Giulietta had polished, until it gleamed like a mirror all morning on her knees, and with her gloved hands, then said, coolly, that the floor still had streaks, before she kicked the side of the bucket with the toe of her red-soled shoe. Soapy water spilled out, spreading across the marble. Giulietta had just cleaned, destroying in 3 seconds what had taken hours of kneeling to achieve. Giulietta drew a short breath, but said nothing. She dropped to her knees at once, reached for the rag beneath Regina's feet, and started blotting the water, her knees and those bright yellow rubber gloves stark against the white stone, an image that made Emilio grind his teeth, because he was the one who'd told her to wear them this morning. And then it happened. While Giulietta was bent over on her knees, wiping up the water right under Regina's feet, Regina lifted her right foot and brought it down. Not a step, not a slip, but a slow, deliberate motion, pressing the sharp heel of her Louboutin into the back of Giulietta's right hand, where it lay flat on the floor. Through the microphone, Emilio heard the heel grind on rubber, and a small hiss escaped Giulietta's throat as she yanked her hand back to her chest, curling in on herself like a wounded animal. But she didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't look up. She only bowed her head lower, as if pain were the price she had to pay to stay, to keep earning money for Rosa's dialysis, to avoid being thrown out on the street one more time. But in the very moment Regina pressed down, Emilio saw what he should have seen last night. To keep her balance while standing on one foot and shifting her weight into that heel, Regina flung her right arm outward, the very arm she'd claimed Julieta had grabbed and shoved into a marble tabletop until it bruised so badly she couldn't move it. That arm now lifted high to shoulder level with the flawless flexibility of a ballet dancer. Not a single flinch, not a single grimace, not the faintest sign of pain existing beneath the silk. Emilio shoved his chair back and shot to his feet, both hands braced on the desk, staring at the screen as the image of Regina's arm moving freely, as if it had never been injured, looped over and over in his mind. The lie didn't collapse slowly. It exploded like bulletproof glass punched through by a shot, and behind it was the raw, sickening truth that the woman he'd shared a bed with for months had just stomped on the hand of the girl he'd nearly ordered killed last night, and that her whole victim act was nothing but a spell cast in a power war, one that he, a notorious mafia boss, had fallen for like a fool. Julieta was still kneeling on the floor, clutching the stomped hand to her chest, head bowed low, breathing shallow and fast, when little Noah woke up. He'd drifted off on the Persian rug the moment Julieta set him down, but the sharp click of heels and Regina's icy voice had yanked him out of sleep, and now he was sitting up, rubbing his eyes with two tiny fists, looking around the room with that groggy stare that was already searching for what every 18-month-old looks for the second they wake. A familiar face, a smile, a hand reaching out. Noah's eyes moved to Julieta, curled on the ground, then slid to Regina standing tall in the middle of the room, and with the simple, absolute logic of a child who didn't yet know how to sort good from evil, he crawled toward the nearest adult. Emilio saw his son on the screen crawling toward Regina, and every muscle in his body locked tight. He wanted to tear through the monitor, wanted to roar, "No, stop, come back." But all he could do was stand there, gripping the edge of his desk so hard the mahogany creaked under his hands. Noah reached Regina's feet, plopped down beside the red-soled Louboutins, then picked up the little plastic toy car he'd been holding in his sleep, and lifted it high, chin tipped up, grinning wide with a mouth that didn't yet have enough teeth, full of the innocent faith that any grown-up would be happy to see his car. He babbled a sound that came out like ka, meaning car, and he waited. He waited for a smile, waited for the adult hand to reach down and take the toy, waited for the wow Julieta always said whenever he showed her anything at all. But what he got wasn't a smile. Regina's scream ripped through the room like shattering glass. "Don't touch me, you filthy thing." And before Emilio could even draw another breath, Regina's hand shoved hard into Noah's shoulder, with all the force of an angry adult crashing into the body of an 18-month-old child who weighed not even 12 kilograms. Noah toppled backward, his back slamming into the marble floor, the toy car flying from his hand and skittering across the room. And the cry that burst from his mouth wasn't the cry of hunger or tiredness, it was the cry of pure terror, the cry of a small creature that couldn't understand why he was hurting when all he'd wanted was to share something joyful. Gianna, lying only a few steps away on the rug, heard her brother cry and reacted with twin instinct, her mouth opening, her face flushing red, and then she screamed too, her wail joining Noah's until the two cries became a painful chorus that filled the living room. Emilio shouted in the study, his fist slamming down on the desk so hard the whiskey glass jumped and spilled across the keyboard. But on the screen, dozens of kilometers away, his son was still on that cold floor he couldn't reach. But someone could. Julieta changed in less than a heartbeat. The girl who'd been kneeling all morning without daring to lift her head, the girl who'd been stomped on without making a sound, the girl who'd swallowed every insult because she needed every dollar to keep her grandmother alive, that girl vanished. What rose from the marble wasn't a nanny anymore. It was something primal with no name in any language except instinct. And it moved faster than any bodyguard Emilio had ever hired. Julieta was at Noah in 2 steps, dropping to her knees beside him, both hands in bright yellow rubber gloves flying over his head, his neck, his back, checking bone, checking scalp, checking everything her half-finished nursing training had drilled into her, her mouth whispering over and over, "Jules is here, you're okay. Jules is here," until she was sure nothing was broken, nothing was bleeding, nothing existed except fear. Then she stood, lifted Noah into her right arm, and he immediately buried his face into her neck like he was diving into a shelter. Her left arm reached back toward Gianna, crying on the rug, shielding her, forming a wall of flesh and bone between 2 children and the woman who'd just shoved a baby to the floor. Emilio saw Julieta's eyes on the screen and his breath caught. They weren't the downcast eyes he'd grown used to over 3 months. They were looking straight at Regina, burning, not a single drop of fear left in them. And in that moment, Emilio realized he was witnessing the most raw, original courage he'd ever seen in his life, braver than any gunman in his organization, because those men had guns, and this girl had nothing but bare hands wrapped in yellow rubber. "You can call me filthy," Giulietta said, and her voice didn't shake. "You can stomp on my hand. You can make me lick this floor if you want. But if you touch the children one more time, I swear to God I won't stand still." Regina's eyes widened in shock, because in 3 months, she'd never heard Giulietta speak more than 2 sentences in a row, and she'd never heard her speak like this, like someone with nothing left to lose. "You dare," Regina snapped, stepping forward, lifting her right hand high, palm open, ready to slap. But Giulietta didn't close her eyes, didn't turn away, didn't flinch. She raised her left hand, the one in that bright yellow glove, up to face level, ready to catch the slap and block it. And she said in a low voice, each word clear, "Do it. But you should know this. For these 2 children, I'm willing to hit back. I've got nothing to lose. You do." Regina's hand hung in the air, trembling, and Emilio saw on the camera what he'd seen hundreds of times in the underworld. The moment a bully realizes the prey isn't afraid anymore, and like every bully from a street thug to a queen in a living room, Regina stepped back. Her hand dropped, but her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred, and she leaned toward Giulietta, lowering her voice into a hiss the microphone caught, syllable by syllable. "You're finished. When Emilio gets back, I'll tell him you shoved the boy. I'll say you hit him. You won't walk out of this house on your own 2 feet. You'll walk out in a body bag, because you know how this house handles problems." Giulietta didn't say another word. She only held Noah tighter, placed a hand on Gianna's head as the little girl crawled to her feet, and stood there in the living room flooded with Chicago afternoon light, like a statue of defiance, 2 children clinging to her like a lifeline, knowing full well that Regina's threat in this house wasn't empty. Regina turned her back on Giulietta, as if the nanny no longer existed. And what happened next on the screen made Emilio realize the woman he'd planned to marry wasn't just a liar. She was an architect of destruction, someone capable of designing both a crime scene and a victim from nothing. Regina walked to the large decorative mirror hanging in the hallway that connected the living room to the main foyer, and what she did in front of that glass made Emilio feel sick with how cold and meticulous it was. First, she lifted both hands to her head and started tearing apart her perfect blonde hair, pulling strands out of place, raking and twisting until it looked like someone had grabbed her hair and yanked hard in a fight. Then she tilted her head, studied the result in the mirror with the evaluating gaze of a director checking a take, and adjusted a few strands so it would look more natural. Next, she pinched hard at the soft flesh above her left arm, right where she'd shown Emilio an old bruise last night, pinching with thumb and forefinger with enough force to turn the skin red, then purple, twisting it, holding it for a few seconds before letting go, checking the result, then pinching again in another spot to make it more convincing. Not flinching, completely calm, as if self-inflicted injury were a skill she'd practiced into mastery. Emilio remembered the bruise from last night, and now he understood why it had looked unnaturally symmetrical, because it hadn't come from being grabbed or shoved. It had been made by her own hands in front of a mirror with the precision of a makeup artist. Then Regina gently tore at the neckline seam of her Valentino dress, just enough to look like it had been tugged in a struggle but not enough to ruin the structure, and Emilio realized with disgust that even while staging a fake scene, she was still lucid enough to protect the designer piece. That blend of cruelty and vanity made him understand her heart wasn't stone, it was hollow. When she finished dressing the part of the victim, Regina returned to the living room and walked to the side table where an abstract ceramic sculpture sat, one Emilio had bought at an auction in New York. She lifted it with both hands and threw it straight onto the marble floor. The crash blasted through the study speakers like a gunshot. Sharp fragments sprayed in every direction, and one large piece struck Giulietta's shin, slicing through the gray uniform fabric and leaving a long tear, and beneath it, a red line of blood. Giulietta didn't scream. She only turned to shield the children, bending low, using her back as a roof so no shard would fly into Noah and Gianna. Emilio saw blood soaking through Giulietta's uniform, and he had to grip the edge of the desk because the rage rising in him wasn't the cold, calculated anger he used in business. This was the primal fury of a man watching his children threatened, and the person protecting them hurt while he couldn't do a thing. Then Regina pulled her phone from the dress pocket and Emilio watched the most terrifying performance he'd ever seen in his life, more terrifying than the times real enemies had stared into his eyes and sworn they were innocent right before a sentence was read. Regina dialed 911, lifted the phone to her ear, and in less than a second her voice transformed completely from ice-cold to trembling panic. "Please help me. Please send someone now. I'm at the Verano estate, 472 Lakeshore. The nanny attacked me. She has a weapon. I think it's a sharp ceramic shard. She's threatening the children. I don't know what she'll do next. Please hurry." Her voice broke exactly where it needed to break. Her breathing hitched exactly where it needed to hitch. Tears welled at the precise moment they were supposed to. A performance that, if Emilio hadn't had the camera, he would have believed down to every syllable. Giulietta heard the call from the corner of the room, where she was sitting on the floor holding the children, and Emilio saw her face go pale on the camera because she understood exactly what was happening. She knew that when the police arrived, they'd see a wealthy white woman with torn hair, ripped dress, bruises on her arm, crying, and a Mexican girl in a nanny uniform sitting in the middle of a wrecked room, and she knew what the outcome of that equation was in this country. But what truly made Emilio's skin crawl was the second call. Regina ended the 911 call, wiped her tears with the back of her hand as neatly as flipping a switch, then dialed another number, a private number, and her voice returned to its original ice. "Derek, I just called 911 to report an assault at the Verano estate," she said. "Make sure you're the one who responds to this call. I want that little nanny arrested on the spot and charged with assault with a weapon. I want her held without bail. My family will remember. You understand what I'm saying?" Emilio heard every word through the microphone system. Derek, Sergeant Derek Malone of the Chicago Police Department, the name Franco, had once mentioned in a report about corrupt officers tied up with rival families, and now Emilio understood that this second call wasn't just the act of a jealous woman trying to ruin a nanny. This was the Ashford family activating a piece on the inside of the Chicago police force against someone under the Verano roof, and in Emilio's world that had one very specific name: betrayal. Emilio pulled out his phone and dialed Franco, his hand no longer shaking, because the tremor of fear had given way to the dead calm. Everyone who knew him understood was the most dangerous sign of all. Franco picked up after a ring. "Bring men to the house now," Emilio said, his voice flat as a lake before a storm. "Everything's changed. I need 4 men at the front gate, and you at the main door. The police will be here in a few minutes, and one of them, a sergeant named Derek Malone, is Ashford. Handle him our way. And Franco." Emilio paused. "There's a girl in the living room holding my children. She's not the enemy. She's the only one protecting them. Keep her safe. That's an order." Giulietta heard Regina end the second call, and in the few seconds of silence that followed, she saw her future as clearly as a sentence already written. The police would come. They would see a white woman from the Ashford family crying with bruises and a torn dress. They would see a Mexican girl in a nanny uniform sitting in the middle of a wreckage of shattered ceramics and soapy water, and they wouldn't need to hear a single explanation before they snapped cuffs on her, especially with the sergeant in charge already given orders. She knew she could run. The back door by the kitchen led to the garden, and from the garden she could climb the east fence into the alley that connected to Lakeshore. She'd memorized that route without meaning to over the last 3 months every time she took the children out for air, but running meant leaving Noah and Gianna in this room with a woman who'd shoved an 18-month-old to the floor without even blinking. And to Giulietta, that wasn't an option. It wasn't difficult. It simply didn't exist in the universe of choices she lived in. So she didn't run. She did the exact opposite. Giulietta sat down in the middle of the living room floor, right on the broken ceramic pieces she swept aside with her forearm to clear a small, clean space, big enough for 2 babies, not caring that sharp edges scraped her skin through the torn uniform fabric. Then she pulled Noah and Gianna into her lap, set both of them on her thighs, and turned her back completely to Regina, as if that woman had been erased from the world Giulietta was building for the children. Noah was still hiccuping through sobs, his face red and soaked, and Gianna clung to Giulietta's collar with 2 tiny, trembling hands. So Giulietta bent close to their ears and whispered, "Let's play the cover your ears game. Jules will sing, and you cover your ears and only listen to Jules, okay? Don't listen to anything else." Then she started to sing. The song didn't have a name. It was the melody Rosa had sung to her when she was 14 and curled up on her bed after her father's funeral. It was the melody Rosa had sung again when she was 16 and sitting beside her mother's hospital bed in the emergency room of a public hospital. It was the melody Rosa had sung every night for years after that, when the orphaned girl couldn't sleep because of nightmares. A Spanish lullaby with no fixed words, only soft sounds Rosa invented to match the breathing of the granddaughter in her arms. And now Julieta sang it to two children, who weren't Rosa's blood, but needed her more than anyone. Julieta's voice trembled on the first notes, because her throat was tight with tears. But by the second line it steadied, gentle, warm, low, and even like a cradle song drifting in from somewhere far away and very old, and Noah stopped hiccuping, his wet eyes slowly closing, his fingers still clutching her apron but his body already going soft, and Gianna loosened her grip on Julieta's collar and curled into her chest like a kitten, finding the only warm place in a cold house. Regina stood behind them, staring at the scene with disbelief on her face. "You're singing," Regina said, half laughing, half sneering. "You're about to go to jail and you're sitting there singing. You really are crazy." Julieta didn't turn around, didn't stop singing. She only spoke between two lines of the lullaby in a calm that felt almost unreal. "Call whoever you want. The police, the army, whatever. But the last minutes I have in this house will be peaceful for the children. I won't allow their last memory of me to be your screaming." Then she returned to the lullaby as if the conversation had never happened. Dozens of kilometers away, on Interstate 90, Emilio was driving his black Maserati Levante through Chicago's evening traffic at 140 kilometers an hour, his left hand on the wheel, his right hand with the phone mounted on its holder, and through the car speakers the sound from the camera system streamed live into the cabin. He heard Julieta's lullaby. That soft Spanish melody filled the leather-lined interior, mixing with the whistle of wind against the glass and the growl of the engine. And it tore Emilio apart in a way no bullet or blade ever could, because he was listening to a girl he'd almost ordered killed last night sing his children to calm with every ounce of love she had, while waiting to be arrested for a crime she hadn't committed. Tears blurred his vision. Streetlights and headlights ahead smeared into long streaks of light, and Emilio Verano, the man who hadn't prayed even on the day his mother was buried, even on the day Catherine breathed her last in the emergency room, whispered a plea aimed at no one in particular, aimed at the invisible emptiness above the highway. "Please let me get there in time. Please keep her safe until I get home. I'll fix everything. I swear I'll fix it." On another road cutting north, Franco sat in the back seat of a black Escalade with 4 bodyguards, phone to his ear, issuing a string of short, quiet instructions in the flat, emotionless voice of someone used to handling crises. And when one of the guards asked the priority level of the situation, Franco only said 2 words: "Level 1. And everyone understood that Level 1 in the Verano house meant be ready for anything. The black Maserati Levante tore through the iron gates of the Verano estate at a speed that made the guard jump aside and hit the barrier button without even managing a greeting. The tires ground over the white gravel drive that usually took Emilio 30 seconds to cross, but today he swallowed it in less than 5, before slamming the brakes at the front steps, the nose of the car stopping less than a hand's breadth from a marble column. The engine still roared, because he didn't bother to shut it off. The door flew open, and Emilio lunged out, his tie crooked, his hair a mess from raking it back again and again, with a sweat-wet hand, his eyes bloodshot from tears, and from the rage that had heated him on Interstate 90, like raw steel in a furnace. He didn't look like the polished Mafia boss Chicago knew. He looked like a wild animal that had scented an intruder in its den. He shoved the front doors with both hands. The heavy oak slammed into the wall with a crash that made the painting in the foyer shudder. His footsteps hammered down the stone hallway like war drums, and before he even reached the living room, Regina appeared in the doorway, eyes glossy with manufactured tears, hair ruined exactly as designed, Valentino's sleeve torn exactly where she'd ripped it, and she launched at him like a guided missile. Both hands shot out and clamped around Emilio's right arm, nails scraping his suit fabric, her mouth already running the script before her body even reached him. "Emilio, thank God you're home." She attacked me. "She's crazy. I was so scared. The children almost got hurt. You have to throw her out right now. Call Franco to handle her." But Emilio had heard that voice twice already today. Once through the fake 911 call, and once through the call to the corrupt sergeant. And now, hearing it come out of her mouth in front of him in flesh and bone, it felt so false it made him nauseous, like smelling rotten food wrapped in pretty paper. Emilio looked down at Regina's hands, gripping his arm, at those perfect polished nails scratching his suit, and pure disgust spread from the point of contact through his entire body. He didn't yank away. He didn't shove her back. He did something far worse. Slowly, he lifted his left hand and peeled Regina's fingers off his sleeve one by one, thumb and forefinger on each, like picking a slug off clothing, with a cold contempt so sharp it seemed to thicken the air around them. "Don't touch me," Emilio said, and it wasn't a shout, it wasn't a bark, it was a low, rough murmur from the bottom of his chest that anyone in Chicago's underworld would recognize as the last sound before someone disappeared from the earth. Regina froze, her hand still hovering in the empty space where Emilio's arm had been, her eyes widening for the first time not in performance but in real confusion, because for months she'd said anything, and Emilio had believed her. She cried, and he held her. She frowned, and he asked what was wrong, and now his reaction didn't exist in any script she'd prepared. Emilio walked past her without looking, his shoulder brushing hers as if she were a ghost, an object,